the goal in life is not a general officer in the United States Air Force. It's being the best husband, the best father, and the best grandfather. If it's not that, then I'm missing my priorities.
My guest today is retired Lieutenant General Bob Skinner. Bob is a career communicator and cyber leader who spent more than 4 decades at the intersection of national security, technology, and leadership. Bob's final command included oversight of the White House Communications Agency, the team responsible for ensuring the president is always connected anywhere in the world.
The White House Communications Agency is the voice of the president. When you hear the president talk, 98% of the time, it's going to be the White House Communications Agency providing that communications capabilities.
In our conversation, Bob reflects on leadership under pressure, strategic decision-making, the realities behind presidential travel, and the emerging risks and opportunities of artificial intelligence.
Every time you have promise, you also have a challenge that an adversary can use. The bigger issue to me is going to be the transparency piece of this. Is that a person or is that an AI bot?
This is a grounded, thoughtful discussion from someone who's lived inside the system and understands what's coming next. And now, here's Bob Skinner. I've got Bob Skinner across from me. Tell me, who is Bob Skinner?
Tough question to start with.
I know there's a lot of ways you could answer that, but I ask an
Yes.
open-ended question because I love to see where people start.
Yeah. So I would say about 10 years ago, I would have said, general officer in the Air Force, and I was in the Navy and the Air Force. Nowadays, I say I start out with husband, father, grandfather, and then retired Lieutenant General in the United States Air Force. And I've done that for a couple of reasons. First one is, I think we've moved over 25 times in my career.
Wow.
I have 3 children, and they've, probably haven't been through all of them. They've been through a lot of those moves, and they've sacrificed a lot more than I ever have. And so I want to make sure it's clear that, the goal in life is not a general officer in the United States Air Force. It's being the best husband, the best father, and the best grandfather. So that's why I kind of use that as my starting point of who I am, because if it's not that, then I'm missing my priorities.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. As a father, that's kind of what I like to lead in with too, husband, father. And then we do lots of other interesting things that pay the bills and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
But my life is there.
Yes.
Like that's the centerpiece.
Yeah. And how do you provide for, how do you protect? How do you make sure that you're taking care of them, and vice versa, right? Because it's a multi-way street when it comes to families. And so that's why and so part of this is I'm here for a couple of days. I go up to Pennsylvania to be with my son and daughter and grandson. So and then come back to Virginia for a couple of days.
So you're relatively recent as a retiree.
Yes.
Right? You've only been out for better part of a year.
Just a little over 30 November of last year was my official retirement date.
And with, I've seen your resume. It's an impressive resume in terms of military service. To have so much there and then have this year, has there been a lot of decompression and then like introspection and retrospection and now processing so much of it?
Yes. Significant decompression. What I set out was, I want to have 4 to 5 months of doing nothing. Right. Go travel, go visit family. In fact, I went to Hawaii for a month with my daughter and her family. So we did that for a month. So 4 to 5 months, I did really nothing. And then I slowly started getting into, well, what do I want to do? I thought about it beforehand as I was getting ready to retire, but I didn't really think do I want to go full time or do I want to do part time? And what I realized was, let's start out part time. And then if that fits the bill, then let's go ahead and do that. And that's what I've done. I'm on multiple boards. I'm doing consulting. I'm doing some work with the U.S. Air Force Academy from teaching with cadets, which is fascinating.
Bringing up the next generation.
Yeah, oh, exactly. Oh, yes. And paying it back, right? At the end of the day, you want to pay back what those before you did for you. So that's kind of what we're doing right now.
At the end of that career, closing that chapter, and now you've got all these prospects in front of you. I'm sure, a retired general officer is with your resume and with the things that you've done is probably a pretty interesting prospect for a lot of boards and companies that are like, hey, get over here, jump right back in, and they'll probably give you as much work as you would like.
Yes.
I think it's wise to take it a little slow. I like that approach, but I'm sure you could jump right back into whatever interests you.
Yeah. One of my mentors told me, he goes, your biggest questions you're going to have to answer is, when is it too much? He goes, because you will have plenty of opportunities, just like most retirees do. And so you have to figure out, what's your criteria for working with different companies? What's your criteria for working with different individuals? And you'll have to say no at some point in time, because there will be more opportunities than what you have the bandwidth for. And again, I didn't want to work full time. And so my goal was, let's work, part-time in some form or fashion. And I had the flexibility to ramp that up, ramp that down as appropriate with the companies that I'm supporting.
Was there any part of you that was like, maybe I just stay here and we just live on the beach, see it out from here?
So, as you know, in the job before my last job, I was out in Indo-Pacific. And we were there for like 16, 17 months. And I told my wife I could live here.
And Hawaii is awesome.
She nixed that.
Okay.
She said, nope, too far away, because we have all of our kids at that time were on the East Coast. She goes, just too far away. And now 2 of our kids are on the East Coast. She goes, nope, that's too far away. She goes, you can go visit. Your daughter's there now for 3 years with her husband. And so you can go visit when you want. But she goes, we are not staying there.
Yeah, I could see the temptation. I've only been to Hawaii one time for a couple of weeks, and it was a very nice change of pace. But someone else who has their entire life on the East Coast, being 6 hours behind everything, was kind of tough for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
But I could see, it being an idyllic retirement setting.
And my daughter and my wife they talk all through the day. And so that's been a big adjustment for them, because she's in Hawaii now.
Oh, okay. So you guys
and my wife's on the East Coast, and so my daughter wants to call late, but my wife's sleeping, and vice versa. So they've had to work through that.
So a family that has been through all this travel and moving, and I'm sure during your career you were probably traveling and out a lot, and now it sounds like they're out and all separate. I mean, that's a lot to keep cohesion of a family with all that challenge.
Yes, and especially with the time difference. But we have a group chat together, right? And so we're at least chatting. And sometimes it was funny, because in my last job, I couldn't take my phone into my work. And so therefore I had to leave it outside. And when I would come home at night, or when I go to the car after my day, I have like 100 messages from that one group chat.
Right. They've been all chatting.
Because they've been all chatting. They've been working
up.
that, and I got to catch up. And my wife would go, she goes, why don't you answer these things? I said, well, there's too many of them. I said, I can't answer all these.
Yeah.
I said, if it's important, I said, let me know afterwards, or let me know when I get home, but not until then.
That's something people don't always think about. The sacrifice. I know you mentioned your family made a lot of sacrifices, and I think it's awesome that you recognize that and you point that out. But also a lot of sacrifice from our folks in uniform. I mean, to have to go check in somewhere where you can't be connected to your personal life for an entire day. I think a lot of people take that for granted, especially in like the post-COVID era. A lot of us are working from home. I work from home. I'm around my family all day, every day. It's a beautiful privilege. I think a lot of people are starting to take that for granted. And then the federal workforce, and a lot of the folks I know who are like on the high side, who have to go into a skiff, they don't have that luxury. They have to go plug in and be largely unreachable, other than through, a single phone line that people can call. Like, if there's a major problem, go get so-and-so out of the skiff.
Right. Well, I remember being deployed where you didn't have social media. You didn't have the internet. All you had was phone calls.
Right. You didn't have the video calls.
And your phone call was maybe once or twice a week, versus almost daily now that you could have, even from. So, that's what we grew up with. And then COVID, happy to have a conversation on COVID and the impact of COVID. We were in Hawaii during that time. And it was pretty amazing. The impact that it had on our youth and on even operations, which I don't think we've even come close to understanding that.
Yeah.
It's going to be another decade before we realize what the total full impact of COVID was.
I totally agree. I've been thinking about this recently. I was watching, so outside of my cybersecurity career, I'm a paramedic. I've been a paramedic for about as long as I've been doing cybersecurity. And so I try to keep a pulse on like public health and what's going on there. And I was just listening to an interesting podcast talking about some of the post-COVID things that they're seeing, like psychological development in the youth during that time, and how that's changed already. Just 4 or 5 years removed, we're seeing different behavior patterns. We're seeing more antisocial behavior patterns, and it's going to be huge and interesting public health discussion. If it happens again, what are we going to do differently because of what we learned? Right. And you kind of think on, the acute challenge that was COVID and controlling the spread and controlling the overwhelm of the hospital systems, but then the social damage of how long we were in quarantine, everything. It's a very interesting and challenging problem among the many that we have to face.
Yeah.
So let's get into that. Let's get into all of that. Let's talk about your military career. And I'm going to ask you to do the impossible, because I know condensing 40 some odd years into a set of sound bites is going to be very difficult. But give us the highlights. Where do you start? What's your career look like? Where do you end?
Yeah. Start out in the Navy, and I worked at administrative
As an enlistee.
as an enlistee. And actually, I joined the Navy, see the world. And I got the Pentagon the entire time. I worked for the Secretary of the Navy in their administrative office. Actually, it was more of the mailroom, but administrative office sounds a little bit better.
Something about that's just kind of, sorry, not to laugh. It's just funny to be like, hey, my motivator was, let me see the world. And you think I'm going to be on the aircraft carrier. We're going to be out deployed out in the sea. I'm going to go see all these countries. And they're like, we'll see you at the Pentagon. Yeah. We'll see you right outside DC, which is not a glamorous situation generally,
especially for a junior enlisted person.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day. And so, I had to get multiple roommates to be able to afford an apartment and afford a place to live. But it was great. Right. And it was at the time where they stopped PCSs for a little bit because of budget cuts. And so I was supposed to leave after 18 months.
PCS, is that?
Permanent change of station. So moving from one location to the next. And they stopped that for a little while because of budget cuts. And so then you were there until your end of active service. And then I decided, well, I want to become an officer because I got my degree at night at Park College. Go Park College. And then joined the Air Force and spent all my time as communicator, cyber. I did 10 years in space, working for in Space Command, mainly doing the cyber part of Space Command. But I was also General Raymond's deputy when he was Air Force Space Command commander. And so really it's all about communications, cyber, computers, information technology, and understanding operations and how the technology can support those operations and vice versa.
There's two what seem to be emerging domains. One now has its own military branch in space. You also have the cyber domain, which doesn't yet have its own branch, but I know there are some folks peddling for that. Mark Montgomery was on the podcast.
I know Mark real well.
And feels very strongly like, hey, we need a branch for this. So I love that you've been in both. And I have a lot of questions about what we're doing in both. Honestly, I'm kind of interested in why Space Command became or was spun out into its own branch first. To me, the largest threat, now I'm a cybersecurity practitioner, so of course I'm like, my bias is cyber.
Right.
I am surprised. I think that's the way more realistic domain where bad things are happening now, where we need a really strong strategic position. But I'm also a layman about space. I don't know what the threats are about space, and I don't know what kind of criticality that has. I know it's critical infrastructure at this point. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that. Just let's dive in.
I would say, think about this question. What would you do if space was not around? So a day without space would be a day without.
I would not have known what the traffic was looking like to get here.
Correct. Yeah. You wouldn't have GPS. You wouldn't have some of the satellite communications, although most communications is done through transoceanic trunks and terrestrial. There is still some. You wouldn't have some of the IR sensors, infrared sensors that we have that are on our space. You wouldn't have, SpaceX. You wouldn't have. I'm trying to think of Elon Musk and not Starshield, but Starlink.
Yeah.
There's a lot of capabilities that you would not have without space. And so I think the big reason to me that space became a reality as a domain was it's been there a while. We understand domain, and they wanted those in leadership positions wanted a more focus on space that they thought that the Air Force was not giving it. And so therefore, hey, let's try this. Let's work this, and let's have a separate space force, space service. And I think after some, I'll say fits and starts, but it's probably too strong a word. I think there's a lot more focus on space. They're focusing, it's a warfighting domain. And there's a lot of things that are happening up in space that people don't know about that are putting some of our capabilities and our national security at risk.
So the term you just used, I want to open that up a little bit. A warfighting domain. We're recognizing space as our warfighting domain. What does that mean?
That means that it is a contested environment. It's no longer not contested to where everyone is just following all the rules. Everyone is playing nice in the sandbox. They are not. There are nations out there who are trying to put our assets and our space capabilities at risk for their benefit. And so that's what I mean by warfighting domain. We have to treat it as a warfighting domain because it's contested. And if we don't protect it and we don't have the plans to protect it or secure it, then at some point in time, we may not have it when we need it.
That concerns me greatly that, it's contested. Is it contested in a hot way yet? Have there been attacks on space infrastructure between foreign actors?
I would just say that the potential exists.
Enough so that we need to deal with the threat.
Yes, that just like we have with land, just like we have with air, just like we have with sea and subsea, all those different domains. If an adversary can leverage a different domain to put themselves in a position of advantage, then that's what they're going to do, right? It's asymmetric warfare at the end of the day, and so we have to treat all the domains as a potential area of opportunity for an adversary to put us and our national security at risk. It would be naive to think that an adversary or a criminal or some other individual organization wouldn't try and take advantage of that.
I guess it's one of the downsides of space becoming more accessible, which is still wildly inaccessible, but it's becoming way cheaper to get up there and commercialized. A potential downside is more people can compete to get up there.
Right.
More countries can put, systems up there, and I don't know. Sometimes I go a little philosophical on this podcast. I hope you don't mind.
No, that's okay.
There is something disappointing about that final frontier and all the hope and optimism and excitement of exploration and the long history of NASA and how space kind of felt off limits from the geopolitical stuff. Like Russian and American astronauts and cosmonauts met and would work together up there while we couldn't get along down here. At least we could up there. It's disappointing to be like, man, we're going to turn that into another area where humanity can't get out of its own way, And there's that vision of the future I've heard talked about when people raise warning flags about militarizing space, which is you can quickly wrap the Earth in damaged satellite pieces flying at the high speeds they need to. You get enough of that, it's going to be very difficult to put things in safe spacely. Safely. Sorry, I should drink more of this coffee now. That's concerning. So I'm glad, on the one hand, I'm glad we're taking those threats seriously, but it is also like the escalation that you knew was coming, that you wish everyone could just get along. But hey, we feel that way about all the war domains, right? All the battlegrounds, whether it's cyber or kinetic. I wish we didn't have it.
Right. And there still is a lot of partnership going on, right, with our allies and partners, and there's even some partnerships, right, with Russia and with China. It's just you've always got to be prepared because you got to take your interests at heart from a national security standpoint.
And it is generally Russia and China who we're talking about as threat actors.
Just as in any domain, right? Russia and China are ones that we have to continue to look at, and especially with me being out in Indo-PACOM before my last assignment, we saw firsthand the coerciveness of China and what they were trying to do each and every day.
They're doing so a lot of China's behavior I've seen through videos of like their Coast Guard incursions on other people's water and all the fights in the South China Sea and all that sort of stuff. Is that the similar kind of behavior that they're doing, where it's sort of like this belligerent, like, hey, we're just gonna push and push and push and constantly be at the envelope?
They will constantly push. I won't get into any of the details. What I'll say is they will continue to try and push to put themselves in a position of advantage, just like they are doing in cyber today.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the things that they are doing, that Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and all these actors are
Yep.
doing. It's no longer just stealing intellectual property,
Right.
right? They're actually positioning themselves in critical infrastructure, which I know we'll talk about at some point in time, critical infrastructure to where they can have a position of advantage so they can exploit the vulnerabilities at the time and place that they're choosing to cause havoc, not just from a military standpoint, but from a social standpoint. I mean, if you remember back probably 4 or 5 years ago, and just as a clarifier, when I say 4 to 5 years ago, my wife always laughs at me because she goes, "Yeah, that was actually 10 years ago." So my time frame may be off, but think of the blackouts that happened in the Northeast 4 or 5 years ago, up in New York and other
Yeah.
places, and all the social unrest that it
Oh my gosh.
caused.
Yeah.
Imagine the Chinese who are who are potentially in those areas causing that type of a blackout again across parts of the United States.
Right. And they don't like need to physically be there. They can
Correct.
do it from
They can do it where they want.
China
Yes.
or from wherever they're at. Yeah, I one of my favorite things to say on this podcast and in general is when you look at society, it's only ever 3 meals away from total collapse. Like it doesn't have to be crazy. And I have a lot of concerns about resiliencies. I think everyone who's been exposed to critical infrastructure and seen and looked into things like Volt Typhoon, you see the lack of resilience we have across water supply, across electrical power, across our health system is constantly barely holding on. And, something like COVID happens and it all falls apart. There's such a need, I feel like, in all these areas of our society to build more resilience, where it's just like we don't have much margin for error right now. And our adversaries know it and they take advantage of that. And one of the things that China increasingly interests me and scares me is they're not as belligerent as I would have thought or as they used to be. Maybe this is me as a layman. It seemed to be way more imprecise. Like early cyber attacks were very imprecise, very ham-fisted is kind of the word I would use.
Mhm.
And now I think they're way more subtle. And I almost think something like Volt Typhoon, they might be upset that happened, that it became so apparent and so large. It's sort of like with Stuxnet with us. I don't know how,
Yep.
right? Like it's bad that we learned about Stuxnet. We're kind of mad at, from my understanding is we weren't involved, but potentially we were, and that we might be upset with the other foreign power who was involved in that. But to go back to China, what concerns me increasingly is they seem to realize subtlety and positioning are what matter, and just the implied threat, not the actual kinetic outcome yet. They don't need to black out the Northeast. They need us to know that they can, and that can change our decision making. And I just keep seeing strategic moves that position them well for the long term. And I'm increasingly concerned our focus here has gotten so short. I mean, it's the 4-year cycle, it feels
Yes.
like. If not the quarterly cycle. And you see them positioning themselves in decades.
Right.
That's a challenge.
They've always had a long-term view,
Right.
right, as we know it. And, and it's interesting because I would put them just like any organization or any nation, right? You learn, right? You learn what works, you learn what doesn't work. And you continually try and get better at what you're doing. Just like, your company, just like, the companies that I deal with, just like everybody, how do you continually learn and you learn from the best? And the best has always been the United States in my eyes. And it still is, just I may be biased, but I still say the United States is best. So you have to continue to learn. And I think that's what they've done. They've taken a view of maybe we aren't the best. And so let's learn from the best and get better. And part of that is positioning and strategic positioning without being noticed, or because then at the end of the day, you have the veil of surprise that comes in handy in any type of crisis or conflict.
Yeah, I recently watched something where someone was reviewing one of the electric cars coming out of China, and like it just got me thinking about the economic challenge that they present to. Like they were putting forward what looks like a really high quality product, where it would cost half as much as something that we produce here. And man, you just see the economic power and hold that the United States has, and a lot of our soft powered influence start to be waning when you have that coming out. And they're
Right.
doing that in so many areas and so many domains. Sometimes I feel like they're outmaneuvering us already.
Well, and again, their government puts a lot of money towards those companies, so they can offer those at a cheaper price. But that's been their modus for a long time, right? And through their coercion, they give a great deal, but at some point in time, you got to pay the piper.
Right.
And you're either paying the piper during it when all of that data or all that information is going back to the government in some form or fashion, or your bill will come due. And that's what I think people fail to realize in some instances, because it's like, oh, it's such a great deal. Whenever I see a great deal, it's almost like when you buy a house, right? And then a year later, you get this letter in the mail that says, we can reduce your interest rate or reduce your mortgage payment by a third because of this rate. But then when you actually look at it and you call them and you go through details, it's like, okay, this isn't as good a deal as originally stated. A lot of people don't do that extra research to go, okay, they just look at the emotional aspect of, oh my goodness, I can save all this money. Well, that's what these nations are doing too. Some of them are desperate for money, and China's offering them an opportunity to take care of their money woes right away without them understanding the long-term impact.
Yeah, companies don't send you that letter out of the goodness of their nature, generally.
Correct.
Right. Cost them money to send that letter.
Yes.
They're looking for return on their investments. So yeah, China's a big concern strategically, for the country, and what that will mean for the geopolitical stance and the spread of certain types of government. So we definitely have that concern. Now, we talked about space. Let's talk about cyber, because that's the domain that I spend my time in. I work largely with defense contractors, so I have a decent insight into what goes on in that part of the cyber domain and how the foreign actors are trying to disrupt our defense industrial base. Doesn't have its own branch yet, but I think we would say the same term that you used about space, a warfighting domain. That seems like more of a hot space for actual conflict. Like, that seems like there are exchanges of proverbial fire happening on the daily in that domain.
Correct. 100%. I could say a lot more on that, but
It's
it's
there's
correct.
probably a lot you can't say,
Yeah.
but there's probably
when I was out at Indo-PACOM, Admiral Davison was the 4-star commander, and he would always say his number one job. So, from a military standpoint, because that's what he was responsible for, he got State Department for the diplomatic. He would say, my number one job is that when President Xi wakes up in the morning, walks out to his balcony, opens up the shades, looks around and says, today's not the day, and then closes the shades and then goes back. So staying in competition is where we need to try and continually keep this. Well, in the cyber domain, right, that's the first place that competition is happening each and every day. Some people would say it's a warfighting domain. I would just say there's actions that are happening each and every day in that, and they are trying to set themselves up for success militarily, right? So there's logistics and supply that they want to stop from reaching the Pacific, reaching near Taiwan in case China decides to make a run on Taiwan. But there's the economic and the social impact and intellectual property theft and things like that are continuing. But as I mentioned earlier, the biggest thing today and where they've changed their tactics is critical infrastructure and getting into there and then holding and then waiting and holding that at risk for a future conflict or a future position of advantage. And I think that's where I think people really need to take a stronger look at what they are doing each and every day.
Do you see a coherent national strategy in response to this?
I see a haphazard one. We all agree that China is the strategic threat. In the cyber domain, there's a lot of different entities that are working to, there's a policy aspect, there's a technology aspect, there's the cybersecurity part, and the partnerships with industry, academia, even, and with the government. There's just a lot, and having that cohesive strategy, I think, is still lacking a little bit.
Do you see meaningful improvement?
I have seen improvement, yes. I think there's a lot more improvement that has to occur, because a lot of this, in my eyes, comes down to priority. As a CEO, right, as a person in the military, as an organization, prioritization to me is something that is critical, but not necessarily focused on a lot because there's so many things to do, and and you want to do all these things, right? Because we got to get after everything. Well, that doesn't help your force or your personnel. And so how do we prioritize, to me, is the biggest thing that's missing, to where we as a nation understand what the priority is and all had bought into it and all had invested into it. And that way our academia, our industry, our defense industrial base, our commercial industries, our allies and partners, and our government are all swimming and moving and rowing in the same place.
I see a daily uphill struggle, just like in the small world that I'm in. Putting stronger cybersecurity into place is just an uphill struggle.
Right.
It's not prioritized. You're generally creating costs where the benefit is very hard to explain, very hard to translate into, dollars, really. And in a lot of industry, that's the priority. At the end of the day, you got to make the number black at the end of the quarter, right? Yeah. And when you have cybersecurity folks come in and saying like, hey, we need to do all these things that are going to potentially impact operations, potentially slow things down, change workflows, change how you operate, because the way that you've been doing it is not secure. A lot of times cybersecurity people are told to take a hike, get out of here, And so a lot of it's like how we communicate,
exactly,
who we have at the table, who makes the communication happen. But a lot is also just like the priority's not there yet. And I go back to what I said about, our focus being so short term. We have to plant seeds today for the tree of cybersecurity 10 years from now.
Right.
We really struggle to make long-term investments, it seems, in my limited experience. It's a lot more about, that's fine, but we're in a 4-year cycle politically. That's not a winning battle for a lot of politicians to say, I'm going to bet on the thing that's going to pay off 10 years from now.
Right. The bigger question, I think, really goes down to the risk, right? And how you articulate that risk to those who may not quite understand that level of risk, I think, is where people make the most money in regards to having cybersecurity being a part of the core mission of that organization, right? And I think that's where we've had trouble with, because you mentioned communication, right? There's an old saying that having been brought up in the communications world and the cyber world, that communicators are the worst communicators, right? You probably heard that. And it's because we talk technical and we don't talk in the same necessary language. And a lot of the individuals who are in leadership positions haven't come up through the ranks of the cyber and the communication, so they don't quite understand.
Right.
And so we've got to be able to, I've always called ourselves, we should be the operational technologists. We have to have a foot in both camps. You have to have a foot in the operations camp, so you have to understand the mission, right? And whether it's a financial, whether it is, power, whether it's a military, government, you have to understand the mission, and then you have to understand the technology and how that comes together to bring the operational success that you need. And we've never really done that great. We made a lot of progress. What's also helped is the culture of society today. There's a lot more technology natives, digital natives, than there ever has, right? Because you see it every day, right? In your phone, and you have to make sure that your phone or you have multi-factor authentication in your financial systems. And so you're seeing it each and every day. Or when you get the letter that says your information has been hacked, right? We've all gotten one of those.
Yes.
And then kind of makes you go, oh, okay. And so you learn more about it. And so I think there's an education piece of this.
Yes.
That really comes into bear. And so I think operational technologists, understanding the risk, I think, is important for those senior leaders. Now, it's not always going to work, right? Because some senior leaders go, okay, I got it. Okay, but I'm focused on...
I accept the risk. Yeah.
Right. I accept the risk. Which is, that's an interesting question. Who does accept the risk at the end of the day? So my last job, on behalf of the Department of Defense, we were charged with, operating, securing, and protecting and defending the DoD networks, right? So the question becomes is, you have a commander at a lower echelon who says, I'm going to accept the risk of not patching or not scanning for vulnerabilities for this period of time, whatever period of time it is, because I'm accepting the risk because we got to do other things. Does he own that risk? Because it's a shared risk. Because if you're connected then it's a shared risk.
Right. It's everyone on the network.
Exactly. So you're accepting risk on behalf of everybody else in the network. And that's a concept that we are still struggling through and still trying to. So who actually is able to accept the risk to say, yes, we can continue doing that? You have authorizing officials who authorize software or equipment onto the network. But you have commanders too. And then you have the cyber commanders who are responsible for the cyber piece of those.
So much
And you have
coordination.
mission commanders. And so to me, the big part of all this is integration, right? How is the integration occurring between all of this technology and all these people and all these organizations so that you understand what risk is being accepted at whatever echelon or whatever level?
There's so much I want to pull on there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go too far.
No. Great point about who owns the risk. And, in the DoD, in the DIB world right now, we have this emerging cybersecurity certification model. It's coming out, CNMC.
Oof.
And yeah, it's littered with its own challenges, right? One thing I've kind of said, and I've heard people say, is this is all well and good right now, but it's like an acquisition and sustainment thing. And a lot of the language is like, hey, if you don't have it, you're not going to be on contract. You're not going to be able to make your parts or whatever else. I've often kind of jokingly said, like, yes, until some theater commander says, like, no, I need those like missiles. And if the company that makes the missile is not cybersecure yet, I'm okay accepting that risk because I need the missiles, And I think we haven't seen that influence this yet. So we're kind of thinking like, yeah, it's all about, binary, but it's not going to end up that way. I also love what you said about operational technologists. Where I've seen in my limited experience in cybersecurity, where I've seen cybersecurity people lose leadership in boardrooms is when they come in as technologists and they're like the binary people of no, like we can't do that. It's not secure. We have to change everything of how we're doing. The sky is falling kind of thing. Very famously had that happen at a company I worked at where chairman of the board was a four-star general, kind of knew how to smell out BS, kind of, that kind of person. And that was the message they got from the security folks. And they were like, that's not how we communicate here. You guys are disconnected from the reality of this is an organization that has priorities that we still have to achieve. You can't say stop everything because of security. So I've seen people come in with that sort of mindset. On the counter, where I've seen people be very successful as security leaders is understanding what the organization is doing. And they create a persona of an enabler. When they're prompted with a question about like, hey, can we do this? Their answer is never no. It's, we can get there, not the way you're thinking, but we can come up with another way. There's a way that we can get there that's more secure. I think that's something that people are learning. And I think as cybersecurity is having more non-traditional folks enter, you have more people crossing from other areas who had that integration skill set, who are entering cybersecurity and starting to fill some of that void, where historically it's been kind of, technologists first. And maybe that's part of why we've struggled.
Yes. And in the other part, to me, it goes back to our discussion of risk, right? As an operational technologist, you may not understand all the risks, but you understand some, and you give options to the senior leaders. Because if you come in and it's a binary, you got to do all this before you can do anything else, then they're going to laugh you out of the boardroom.
Right.
But if you say, here is your risk posture as we understand it, here are some things that you can do from a priority standpoint and kind of walk them through, then maybe they'll say, well, okay, let's do the first two things because that's all that we can afford right now, maybe, or maybe that's, we got these other things that we got to get done, but you're making progress. Because then they even CMMC, as you talked earlier, while I think it's very administrative in nature still and very costly to companies, it's a start. It's something, it's probably a little bit of structure that you can walk along the game plan, walk along the campaign, walk along the path to getting better. Because at the end of the day, what's the goal? The goal is to be better from a cybersecurity standpoint, to protect your mission.
Better today than we were yesterday.
Yes. Yep. In fact, that one of the things I always used to do in my last job was I'd walk into our operations center and I'd ask, I said, are we in a better position today than yesterday when it comes to protecting this significant amount of space in the cyber world? And if we weren't, and I was asked, okay, so why? What's the metrics that you're using? And then I'd say, so what are we doing to get better? What are we doing to get back to the position that we were in, or to get to that position of advantage? And so, but it's a daily struggle, right? Because you may be great today, and then tomorrow a new patch comes out or a new vulnerability is
Right. Reset so
exploited,
much of your progress.
and you reset it, and then you have to go back. So it's a constant movement, but you got to continue to focus on how are we getting better, are we better day than yesterday, as you mentioned. And that's what we try to do each and every day is, okay, so how do we become better at this? But you got to understand the risk first.
This is a self-serving question because I'm, leading and growing a company, and scale is very difficult at a certain size. There are times I miss when our company was, a handful of us, because it was very direct. It was very, hey, here's a problem. Cool. Let's decide together. Cool. I know who's doing what. As you start to grow, different people, different responsibilities, integration and coordination becomes a much larger challenge. And, for someone who grew up in the cyber domain and IT, hands-on keyboard where ones and zeros are the name of the game, a lot of it's very binary. Now I'm operating in this very soft space, and it's a lot of personnel challenges and communication and whatnot. Doing that at scale and at the, at the general level, I mean, that's got to be its own deep skill set that you have to build over, career 40 years. If you could instill some wisdom in me so I could walk out of here a smarter, better coordinator and leader of that sort of operation, I'm all ears for it.
Yeah, I may let you down on this one. Here's what I would say is those who are successful as they move up the ladder of an organization are the ones who can let go of the lower level activities. It is very easy to say, I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the tactical level activities or go doing these things, and that's what I want to do. But you can't do that because you don't have the time. And oh, by the way, they don't want you to be doing that, right? Because it's their job. And so it really comes back to holding people accountable. And I love to talk about accountability because I think that's lacking in a lot of areas in today's society. Holding people accountable, and so surround yourselves with the right people who are going to get things done, who are holding themselves accountable for the job that they're responsible for or the actions that they're responsible to do. And then, to me, the higher up you get, the better team that you build is how you're going to be successful, because let them focus on what they're supposed to, and you as the leader, right? Your job is strategy, it's vision. It's the hiring to make sure that you have the right team, and then everybody understands that. They understand what the priorities are, and then the whole team is running along that same path.
One of the terms I struggle with, because again, I'm a very tactical minded person. Again, I'm hands-on keyboard, and then even in my whole other career as a paramedic, it's very hands-on, problem solve, and direct intervention. It's not at some level sometimes, depending on the incident, it can be sort of like incident control and command at a bit of level, but I'm a strong practitioner. I'm in hands-on, strategy. I always struggle to wrap my head around what's the difference? What makes something strategic? Is it timeline? Is it priority? Is it just a mindset? How do you cross that gap?
Yeah. So to me, the practitioner is kind of you're doing something, right? To me, the strategy part is all that doing comes together under a strategy that all that doing puts you in a greater light, right? Either economically or from a mission standpoint, you're getting better because you have this dot on the wall that you say, okay, that's where we're heading. That's where we want to be, whether it's a financial part, whether it's a capability part, and so let's go towards that team. And then you identify the team members who are going to get you there. And then you just start moving that. And then I call it's a ruthless drive and ruthless management of those tasks and those actions and those people. It's not a bad term, but a lot of times, and you've probably seen this, you walk into an office of an organization and you see this nice glossy, right? Now it may be on their website, but a nice glossy that says, here's our strategy, here's our objectives, here's all the goals, here's all the things that we're trying to do. And then you ask them, well, so how are you doing on those? Because I always like to ask the second, third level question on anything, whether it's a technology company that's coming to talk to me and they say, I got all this AI capabilities and, we're AI certified,
Cool.
Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. And then, so let's Let's go to the second, third level detailed questions. The same thing with strategy. So how are you tracking that? Is your daily or, even within your organization, you probably have meetings periodically, right? Where you get at least some of the senior leaders together or the whole group. Are you starting that meeting off with, here's our strategy and here are the goals and here's where we're at with those goals? Or is it just kind of a free for all, or is the crisis of the day? Because the crisis of the day will eat the strategy if you allow it each and every day.
Music to my soul. You're speaking direct here, because that is sometimes how it happens.
Yeah. But as a leader, you've got to be above that fray and go, we still have this strategy. Now, we may have to make a risk decision that says we had planned on having this objective done or this task done by 15 December, for example. Well, I'm going to make a conscious decision that we're going to accept risk, and that's going to be 15 January or 15 February, whatever the case may be, because I got something else within here that has either come up or that I need to get done first. And that's where we are going to apply our resources. But it's a conscious decision. And so your strategy really helps you with your conscious decisions of where you're moving versus letting the environment impact your priorities all the time.
What again, drop some wisdom on me. If you can distill it, what is a marker of good strategy? Is it that it's simple and communicatable? Is it that it's robust and that it's been super deeply thought out? Like, what marks a good strategy?
Yeah. To me, there's a couple of things. There's the ability to communicate it, because if you can't communicate a strategy, then it's got to be measurable. If your strategy is not measurable, then how do you know you're ever going to get there?
Right.
Or how do you know that, say, here's where we want to be as a company or an organization in 3 years, 5 years, whatever term you want to use. 2 years down the road, how do you know that you're on track to be there at the 3 to 5 if you're not managing it fully? And so to me, it's got to be measurable. And then it's the drive, right? And as you have a team, right, you have some visionaries, right? Usually visionaries, you don't want them driving because they're all over the map.
Yeah.
Right. But you have the visionaries and you have the innovators and you have the drivers. And the drivers are the ones who are going, okay, here's what the visionaries say. Okay, here's how we're going to get there. And then we're going to hold people accountable to get there. And so I think that's part of it is you got here's where we're going to be. Here's how we're going to manage it and measure it. And then let's drive it.
It's we use this concept.
Very simple.
Yeah, right.
In my eyes.
We use this concept in our business, the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, and it's got this concept of visionaries and integrators. And one of the theses that they put forward in the book about it is, every organization has a visionary. They don't all have integrators. Sometimes that person tries to be the same, but the best companies, there's a visionary who sets the vision and integrators. Sometimes I don't like the term visionary. That's the role I play in our organization. It feels very like self-congratulatory to be like, I'm visionary. There's something about that feels kind of, I don't know, weird. But I'm just like that. I'm head kind of all over the place. I've got all these interesting ideas I want to pursue. A lot of them are bad. 9 out of 10 tend to be not great ideas, but hey, every once in a while,
fail fast.
I find, and I've heard that advice, right? Identify the bad ones quickly, and then you can invest in the good ones. But I've definitely seen, in myself, the struggle to keep a coherent strategy because I do have different ideas. One of our strategic points, and now I'm getting free consulting here under the guise of a podcast here. I will say one of our strategic points has been, we want to start moving up the market. We've established ourselves as a reputable company in our space. We have subject matter expertise. Now we've got 5 years or 6 years, give or take, under our belt of successful business. I've set a strategic point among the 5 that I've put together. Move up the market. Now already I hear, okay, we need to refine that a little bit. It's a good goal, but how are you measuring that? What is moving up the market? I know what I'm trying to say, and I know what will enable that, having different service solutions that we can market to that sector, different marketing strategies to reach the larger market customers and all that sort of stuff. If you ask me, what's your progress on that today? I don't know that I have a really measurable good answer other than like maybe the average size of a sales opportunity is getting slightly larger. I don't know, maybe I need to refine some strategy here. This is going to be helpful.
Well, you mentioned, I'm not necessarily like the term visionary. Um, I I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because you need individuals, and one of the things that I'd always try to do is white space on your calendar, right? You've heard this term. So there's you have so many hours in a day
Yeah.
that you're actually working, and if you have all those with meetings, you have zero time to think.
Yes.
Right. And so we always tried to protect some white space. I was always the worst, because I would always say, yeah, come on in. And then I'd lose that white space. But one of our biggest shortfalls, I think, from a senior leader standpoint, is we're getting pulled into so many different conversations and so many different meetings that we don't have time to sit back and go, okay, where are we at? Kind of where are we trying to go? Do I need to refine my vision? Do I need to refine my strategy? Do I need to refine this to help the organization grow and help the organization and the people drive towards that? And so I think there's not enough time that people put towards the visionary piece, because you don't have to be a visionary to have vision. Although some visionaries, that's all they do is vision, right? So I think to me, you've got to have a vision. You've got to have that person who's out there, who's thinking longer term, who's thinking above the fray of the day to day, because the alligator at your heel is the one that you're going to tackle and you're going to fight.
Yeah.
We always, when we were out in the Pacific, right, and there were discussions going on within the department of where priorities go, because I won't say nothing, because things happening in the Middle East, right, they would get the priority because that was the alligator at the heel. And we'd be going, but there's a lot of things going out here, but you wouldn't see it. And so the focus is on the alligator at the heel within the department. And so that's where you got to have that visionary who's not held down or held back by that alligator. And so you still need that, in my eyes.
I haven't heard that phrase before, alligator at the heel. I think I understand what it means.
Okay.
But go back to like crisis of the day.
Yes, crisis of the day, yes.
Yeah, and it's all too easy to wake up, and I could deal with challenging strategy points, or I could throw myself into the crisis of the day. Right. And that's what I know very well. Like, cool, I'll jump right in. Totally speaks to my soul, that.
But you also grow more by not doing that, right? Because if you're comfortable with that, and if you focus more on where you're comfortable versus where you're uncomfortable, then you're not growing as an individual. And so what I've always tried to get our folks, our personnel to do is, go do things that you're uncomfortable, that make you uncomfortable, because you will get comfortable at some point in time.
Yeah.
For the most part. Now there's certain things that you just, okay, you've tried it, you're still uncomfortable. Okay, then let's go on to something else. And so, but I think there's an opportunity there for people to, go expand your horizons, because you have to professionally develop and continue developing each and every day. Because if you're not, the rest of society is, and the rest of the national security apparatus is, and other nations are. And so to me, what I've always focused with as I mentor young individuals is, always be learning and always be trying to improve yourself in some form or fashion.
Speaking of, helping raise the youth, you mentioned working with the Air Force Academy to help with, are they cadets?
Cadets, yes, cadets.
And someone who's been a senior leader in, one of the premier institutions of the world, the United States defense apparatus, right? And the Air Force specifically. As you raise up new leaders and you try to instill in them, like, help create good new leaders, what are some of the things that you point out, like, these are markers of good leadership?
Yeah. So some things that I mentioned with them is, first and foremost, as you come on to active duty, right? Because a lot of them are coming out as cadets, they go into active duty. I said, the number one thing you've got to do is perform, right? You can control that. You can control how you perform, right? You can get the education, you can get training. And I'll tell you, the military does a great job with educating and training the force. But you've got to show that you're a doer. And so always looking for something else. And again, you've got to, I don't want to use balance, because that's always a term that, but you have to balance your life. Unfortunately, a lot of lives aren't balanced because of the situations that are going on. So I like to use the term harmony. Is your life harmonized among the different aspects of your life? And so to me, you got to be a doer and show that you are doing. You got to continually learn. One thing I think that we are missing a lot is critical thinking. How do you become a better critical thinker? And all the academic institutions that I talk to, I say we've got to build better critical thinkers, because at the end of the day, it's great to have AI, right? It's great to have quantum computing. It's great to have all this, but what are use cases? And how are you going to be able to apply it? So how are you critically thinking to define the problem, apply the technology to that problem, to make the right use cases, to then be able to show the greatness of this technology? And I don't think we do enough of that. So there's critical thinking component, and then the continually improving is something that I've been a fan of. Even if it's not in your cyber field, right? Maybe there's some leadership books. Maybe you like painting, right? But it gets you. You're learning something each and every day that's going to make you a better human at the outset.
Yeah, I think that's it would be too easy to think like, hey, get better in your field and just focus on that. Like here's more IT knowledge, here's more cybersecurity, but develop yourself outside of that. I can see that feeding into more well-rounded human, more harmonized. And then I find a lot of people that I really see become strong leaders and strong performers have broad experience and different experience. A lot of times the folks who have been so focused in on just this one thing struggle to go up because they haven't had, variety of experiences and they're not as well-rounded.
Right. Well, think about problem solving, right? Do you want 10 Andys trying to solve this problem? Or do you want an Andy, a Bob, a Michelle, who, Bob may have a psychology degree or in the psychology field. Michelle may have an engineering, Andy may have something else. To me, you want those type of individuals solving the problem because they come at it from a different, different life experiences, different thought patterns. And that to me is where you get the best type of solution for the problem at hand, is when you have a diverse workforce. Because diversity of thought to me is very key as you try to solve the problems. And as you're applying the technology, right? I've seen so many times where companies will say, we talked about earlier, we're AI certified. We have AI all over this. Well, okay, but what's your use case?
Boy.
What problem are you trying to solve? And sometimes there's companies who they don't know what the problem is, but their solution will solve a problem.
Man, yes.
And so you need to be able to have that. But most of the time there's understand what problem you're trying to solve and then bring the technology to bear. And that's where we'll be most successful.
I see so often, we say this a lot. We see a lot of solutions looking for a problem to solve, especially in the AI space. There's a lot of like that second layer.
Yeah.
So many things I see like, hey, we're the AI this company and we are AI powered. And I've said this recently, like a lot of what I see, it's almost like we've invented the engine, like the internal combustion engine. And someone's like saying how they're engine powered. And you go and you see it's a horse-drawn carriage. There's an engine on top and it's like spinning a cotton, like a cotton candy wheel or something. Like that's theatrical. The actual thing that's happening is there's still a horse pulling this carriage, man, right? You're making up this word because that's what we're all saying right now to get money and whatnot. So I definitely see, a lot of that. I want to go back to what you said about diverse workforce. There's some controversy around the word diversity lately. But, my own experience, and I think the experience of anyone who's been exposed to something like a monoculture where there isn't diversity of thought, and someone that's been exposed to the opposite of that, I'll take that every time. One of our strongest performers at our company right now has a teaching background. That comes up all the time. The lessons that she learned in teaching and interacting with children amazingly translate a lot to interacting with adults. Right. They're not that different, and they were all children once. So sometimes the strategies of diffusing situations with students, hey, that can help diffuse situations amongst adults. Mm-hmm. I could have just surrounded myself with people like me, people who grew up hands on keyboard, help desk techs, systems engineers, admins, whatever. But some of our best things come from the people who don't have that experience. Right. They have a different one.
Exactly.
And I think we all benefit from having folks around us that are not like us.
Yep. I am 100% agreement. And you're right. There's a lot of controversy around that. And so I just try and say diversity of thought is what your objective is. How you get that, you can work that as far as your team. But to me, if you don't have that diversity of thought, then you're going to be sub-optimized in your solutions for the problems you're trying to achieve.
Another
To solve.
aspect of leadership I'm interested in your take on is the people side of it. I mentioned a couple of times my paramedic career, one of my earliest exposures to like having to be thoughtful about leadership was I became an officer in the small department I was in, and we had an FDNY battalion chief come down, and he delivered a course on servant leadership. And that really kind of set the tone and set my perspective. And I still go back to that often, where he showed us like an org chart, the classic one at the top
Right.
goes down. He said that you need to flip that from mindset. You're there to serve them, move things out of their way. They're not there to serve your ends necessarily. And I loved that perspective. So I'm always thinking about like, how do you better lead people? What's the right level of accountability? What's the right level of human compassion? You see extremes on both ends where people become very ineffective leaders. What's that balance, and what are those attributes that, we should be developing?
That's a great question. And to me, it always comes back to hybrid, right? If you're on an absolute on one end of the spectrum or the other, you're not going to be successful for long. You just can't. And so to me, like on decision making, right? You have to be compassionate on all of your decisions. That doesn't mean that you're not going to do something that will affect somebody's career or will affect somebody emotionally or hopefully not physically, but emotionally, right? But you've got to take that into account. So I always say, take compassion into account, but don't make an emotional decision, because that's usually when the emotional decisions are usually the sub-optimized type of solution. Because at the end of the day, you still have a mission to perform. But as long as you're taking your people into account as you're performing that mission, then you're in a good stead. And so, when you talk about servant leadership, right? To me, it's a multi-way street, right? You're there. You're right. As a senior leader, you are there to take away all of the firewalls and the challenges and giving them opportunities to be the best of themselves. And that's what we try to do each and every day is, okay, what are we doing to take away any of the inhibitors for an individual to be the best of themselves? But now that individual has a responsibility and they are accountable to be the best of themselves. And so to me, it's a multi-way street, and it's different for every individual. And so as a senior leader, you got to be very flexible and understand that what works for Sally may not work for Harry, that may not work for, but you have that in your toolbox. And so part of the growing and the professionally developing is that critical thinking, right? So there's critical thinking on problem solving technology. There's also critical thinking of problem solving of people, and solving their challenges to helping them be the best themselves, which then, oh, by the way, that makes you even better.
I think you rightly called out earlier the struggle to have that white space to do that critical thinking. It becomes all too easy. I'm like you mentioned, someone knocks on the office door. You're like, yeah, come in. It's fine. I might be deep in the middle of something that needs my attention, but I'm bad with no. And I'm driven to be as helpful as I can, sometimes to, probably to a fault, right? Where you're not thinking, hey, I actually need to protect this white space, and more like, hey, what's the problem of the day? Cool. Let me throw myself in.
Right.
Right. And that's, I like to think it comes from the right place. It comes from the right place in the heart, but it's an emotional decision potentially.
Yes.
Right.
And sometimes it's hey, can we do this later? Right. Vice going in this white space, you have some time available later. And as long as it's not a crisis where it actually needs your decision making, right? Because that's the other part is empowering your personnel and your leaders to make the decisions at the right level. So all that's not coming up to you. That's a hard thing to do, right? Because if something goes wrong, what's the first instinct? Well, I'm gonna pull it up to my level from now on, right? So that's my decision to make versus learning from the mistake, if it was a mistake, but still empowering them, and then just continuing forward, and then maybe set a little bit tighter guardrail, but not a lot, right? And then so that way they can continually learn, and so can you.
Letting go is the hard thing. You mentioned that a while ago. That's from a senior leader, as you mentioned, the people who successfully move up are those who can successfully let go.
Right. Yes. Well, and again, so if you think about, the last organization I was in, the two organizations, 'cause I was dual headed, it was 20,000 personnel, military, civilian, and the contractors supporting. And there's no way that you can have an individual relationship with every one of them.
Yeah.
So you have to focus on those direct reports and those key individuals that are driving the organization, and then they in turn, give them the left and right bounds, and then just run with it, and mistakes will happen. You know that,
But you just got to be okay with it.
right? And hopefully you've kind of worked with them so that they know when they should come to you and when they shouldn't. And sometimes it's like you get phone call in the middle of the night, and my first question was, "What do you want me to do about this right now?" Sir, nothing. Okay, then I don't need to, right? So you don't even need to call me. Now, unless I'm going to get a phone call from a higher level that says, "Hey, we got an outage."
Warn me before
Yes,
I take the beating.
Warn me beforehand. But I have no problem taking the beating, and when we have a few times, unfortunately. But it's a learning experience with every leader. But you've got to be able to let go more and empower them.
I think about this sometimes, it's a couple dozen people under my purview. And this is the largest team by far I've been in charge of. So it's every day is a learning experience. But then I think about like at these highest levels, like the type of position you've been in and having that many people, it's just my brain can't wrap its head around how do you get anything done in that environment?
You're relying on others.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, because those who are actually doing here. And then you have the leaders and middle level managers, and your goal is to impart knowledge, impart empowerment to the right levels that they can help drive the organization. Because what you're doing, as we talked earlier, right? You're setting the strategy, you're setting the vision, you're setting the goals, with them, right? Because everybody has to be invested in that. And then you're just let's follow this along the path, and then let's make course adjustments as necessary. And most of the time, your deputy or the lower levels can make those adjustments. If it impacts something that you've approved, then they should come back to you, right? And just say, "Hey, sir, just so you know, or ma'am, here's things that we've got to change now because of X, Y, and Z constraints or the environment that you're in."
So I got exactly what I was looking for. Some self-serving. This is insightful. This is super helpful and very interesting. I do wonder, is this something that comes naturally to certain people? Is this learned skills and a bit of both?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, because you've got to want to be in those positions, but also it's learning. I mean, it is a continual learning from the very beginning. My best mentor was she was maybe 5'4", chief petty officer in the United States Navy, who, while she may be 5'4", I think her boot was like 6 feet, right? Because she put the boot, up against me a few times. But she realized that there was some talent but she needed to mold it. And so I think that's really where it comes to is, putting the effort in to help mold the next generation.
A lot to think about.
So I don't know if I answered your question on that one.
Well,
I think
you
I
give me a
was, I
ton.
think I was left.
There's a ton of useful insight there. And again, this will be helpful for anybody watching, because I think leadership is a lot of what a lot of people have to learn. And one of the things I've come to realize and have said is, like, I always thought leadership came naturally, and you either were or you weren't. And sometimes I would get frustrated where I wasn't strong, but I've really come to learn it's a skill set. And you can learn it now. Like all skills, some things come easier to certain people, but everyone can learn it.
Yes. And there's no cookbook I know there's thousands of leadership books.
Yes.
Right. But there's no one cookbook. And so to me, it's your experiences, it's your learning, it's your reading, and all that together, and what best fits you. Because you as a leader is going to be different than me as a leader. We both can be successful. We both can be very successful, but we're not going to be the same. Nor do you want us to be the same, right? Because you don't want a bunch of robots out there trying to lead. And so to me, it's a hybrid of, there is some innate leadership traits and qualities that individuals have, but even those, if they don't refine them and they don't improve and work on those, then they're going to be passed by others who may not have as much innate capability or traits, but they've learned and they've been through experiences to where they've learned.
I want to, at the time we have, I want to shift to your sweatshirt. We briefly talked about this before we started filming, but hopefully this can come up on camera, but you have a Camp David Presidential Retreat sweatshirt, which I assume is not one that just anyone has.
If you visited Camp David, they have a gift shop that you could, yeah.
Who can go to Camp David? Can anybody go?
No. Very few people.
So how did you end up at Camp David where you could get that?
So the White House Communications Agency is an agency that's under the Defense Information Systems Agency, which I was fortunate to be a part of and be the director for. And so the White House Communications Agency is the voice of the president. When you hear the president talk, when he's up at a lectern, when he's up, I would say 98% of the time, it's going to be the White House Communications Agency providing that communications capabilities. They are with him no matter where he goes, so that he has constant communication with either other senior leaders of nations, or within the Department of Defense, or within the federal government, because he or she has to always be connected, right? And be able to find and talk to whoever they need to from a national security standpoint, from policy standpoint. So that organization was under the Defense Information Systems Agency. And so I was able to visit Camp David once and see kind of how their operation was, right? And it's, the White House switchboard, for example, they get hundreds and thousands of calls on a daily, weekly basis, just calling in. Sometimes it's trying to call in to talk to the president or somebody on the White House staff, or it's like 1-800-encyclopedia. Right. We got this number and we want to call and ask this question. So a great team of professionals who are, as we talked earlier, right, they are traveling all the time, because when the president travels, they travel. At least a team of them travel. And most of the time in fact, all the time there's a advanced team that's out before the president gets to where he's going, to ensure that he has connectivity wherever he's at.
Yeah, as we were talking before the podcast, immediately it was one of those things that you don't think about until someone brings it up and mentions, like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like, this is a person who needs to be reachable at all times, may need to call anybody from wherever they are. And this is a person whose a primary part of their job is traveling. And the president on the campaign trail, overseas, all that, no matter where that person goes, you need to have communications available. And what you said was it's essentially a no-fail mission as well. So not only is it all of that and all the travel and logistics, it's also resiliency, and failure is not an option.
Right. And the agency that I was with actually provides for the president, the vice president, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the vice chairman, the Secretary of Defense, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense. So those are, the 6 key the key senior leaders, right, the highest level of the government, that these teams, because there's multiple teams doing that, are providing the communications capability. So as you mentioned, it is a no-fail mission, and I will tell you, there's no organization that I think is more professional than those, because you also have to deal with problems, right?
I'm sure.
Because nothing goes smoothly, right? Almost nothing. It's a rare time when everything just goes so smooth that it's like, we had not much to do. There's usually some issue that they're working, and these are the ones who I offer are very good at critical thinking, and so they know that if something happens, then they're working the lines. Even when the president's in the air, they're providing some level of communication for the president, no matter where he's at, right? Well, mobile. And so they have to be able to think on their feet very quickly.
I think, critical thinking, and also one of the things we talked about this a little bit earlier, sort of the operational technology. One of the things that occasionally someone reaches out to ask about, like, mentorship and cybersecurity, they want to break in or they want to learn, what makes a good cybersecurity practitioner. And I always tell them, understanding the underlying systems makes you great. Like, that's the basis of good problem solving, is understanding at least what the pieces are. To relate it to the paramedic thing, you start as an EMT, you do a couple months of training, and EMT does a lot of recognition of life threat intervention. And that's kind of what you learn. Hey, blood pressure's low, or, the bleeding's a certain way, like intervene. The gap between EMT to paramedic is generally, somewhere between 1 and 2 years of academic anatomy and physiology. It's a big piece of it. It's starting to understand, well, why are those things a life threat? Understanding the underlying systems, that's how you learn the more advanced interventions, because now you're recognizing not just the surface layer of, hey, I have a problem and here's an intervention. You have an understanding of the underlying process that you need to intervene with to prevent that problem from getting worse, and how to prevent, life and injury, or life threat and injury. So much of good problem solving in the moment, that critical thinking, the ability to respond to that threat, cybersecurity, medicine, or otherwise, has to do, in my mind, with understanding those systems.
Yeah.
Right? If you have these people in the communications environment, I can imagine something not going well. The high stakes of, we need to make sure the president's connected to all this. If they don't understand what all those pieces are at some level, they can't solve that problem.
And there's a certification program for everybody that comes in to make sure that they are certified on each of those different systems. Now, the key part about all this is, and the interesting part that throws a curve into it periodically, is new technology, right? Because the president should have the most modern technology and the best technology around. And so as we use more and more commercial capabilities within the government, then we've got to make sure that we're experts on that commercial technology, so that when he uses it, then if something goes wrong, we know how to fix it, and we're able to. And so there's that certification program is constantly changing as new technologies is introduced to the president's arsenal.
All right, let's talk about the big new technology. Let's open this can of worms. AI.
Oof.
And that's my reaction to it sometimes as well. We've already talked about the AI sort of thing that's happening, where everything's AI powered and all this, but it's a lot of theatrics in my mind. It's just, there's not a lot of depth. Where there is some depth, that's very fascinating. And we see rapid adoption of it. I think it was just this week, Secretary of Defense announced the Gemini. They're going in deep with Google. As you were saying the thing about the president, I'm wondering, like, does the president have open AI on his phone? I wonder, like, I got ChatGPT on my phone. I'm sure people at the White House do too. I'm sure they run occasional things through.
I'm sure they do. Yes.
Through that. So we've got this new technology that we've talked about on this podcast as prompting the fourth industrial revolution. This is the information age transitioning into the artificial intelligence age. Do you agree?
I think before I say yes or no to that, let me provide a little context.
Sure.
I think the revolution, I'll say, is quantum computing, AI together is where we're going to see a significant change, I would offer, in how things are done. And why do I say that? Well, with quantum computing, I mean, the processing power is just going to be so much faster. And if you think about cryptography, and the ability to crack cryptography from today or previous to this, significant national security challenge, and threat. To me, AI is, it's got a lot of promise, as we've already seen, but it's also, every time you have promise, you also have a challenge that an adversary can use, or we've jumped so fast into AI that we don't understand the underlying LLM, underlying data, how have you trained that data, right? And I think the bigger issue to me is going to be the transparency piece of this.
Yeah.
How many times do you make a phone call, right, to whether it's your banking, your financial institution, or you're trying to go buy, whatever capability, and you're either chatting or talking. Is that a person or is that an AI bot? And how do you know?
Increasingly hard.
It is. It's increasingly hard. And do you want to know? I do. Because I don't mind talking to an AI bot, but I at least understand, that it could potentially be giving you, just as a human could give you a wrong answer to it, right? The AI bots can also. But I want to know and understand that. So I think there's a transparency piece of this that I think is missing today. that I think we're going to have to come to grips with, especially from an ethical way of leveraging AI.
I also think accountability, like you mentioned that every AI tool I use at the bottom, they put in that little text down there, the AI might give you the wrong information, always verify.
Yes.
And that's our hands are clean. We're not liable for any bad outcome that they're trying to set up for. Whereas maybe a human gives you the wrong information on the phone, does something wrong, they can hold the human accountable. If the chatbot, if the AI says something wrong and you make a bad financial decision because you called the bank's AI, sorry, it was in our terms of service. You were supposed to verify this.
Right. But the question becomes is, well, you could say that with the human too, right? The human term of service is, we strive, just like AI strives to give you the right answer, or to give you but it may not. And so I think there's this, the accountability piece, I think, is something that we have to continue to study and look at, because I don't think we're there yet. Because, how do you hold it account? If you have that little thing at the bottom, well, but that's, is that really a get out of jail free card?
Right. And there will be litigation to come, for sure. As it becomes so prolific. You mentioned something about like the pace as well, the pace of adoption and how rapidly it's changing and how much is happening. It's I already feel like technological literacy is not where it should be to introduce something of this power. It's it's a good thing we went from a horse to a Model T, not a horse to a Lamborghini. Yes. But there's a lot of power that you just kind of don't really know. You just know I apply gas pedal and I get what I want. That can be very dangerous. This might be what we're looking at now. We have this very sophisticated capability that we're developing. No one really seems to have a full grasp of it. And it feels like we're rapidly losing whatever grasp as it gets further and further. And the stated objective of everybody who's developing AI that I've heard from, is get the AI strong enough that it can make the next version of itself. And once that happens, it seems all bets are off, right? At that point, if it's N+1 that it can create,
right,
and we're not needed, that feels like we can lose control of it very quickly.
Yes. Well, and that's a concern, because even today in how it's being used, right? I mean, it's being used in every discipline, and there's some great things happening with it, right? Imagine if, one of the things that we always struggled with is hiring within the government, right? And how fast can you hire? Sometimes we'd have a position where we would get hundreds of resumes, and the system that they have today is looking for certain keywords, right? But even that would still give you 100 resumes.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows what the keywords are to put in for this position description, and that way we can, our resume will come forward. How can an individual go through hundreds of these resumes to find the right individuals to then be able to interview? Very difficult, right? And time consuming. So how can we leverage AI to shorten that, to really get at the 4 to 5 to 6 that you really want to interview? Sounds great in practice, right? It's great. Well, where does the bias come into play, right? Because does your model that you're leveraging, does it have an inherent bias in it to, maybe male name versus female name?
Right.
Maybe how it was written, right? Because if English isn't your first language, for example, and somebody else's is, does the model that's being leveraged go, well, this looks like a fake, right? Because it's, and then this one isn't, so this one gets through, but this one doesn't. So to me, the bias piece of AI is where I'm really concerned with.
Yeah.
Because that can be in anything, right? Whether it's hiring, whether it's even, as companies do, even cybersecurity aspect of things.
Yeah, that's a big point, because when you're interacting with something like AI, it feels like it's objective. It feels like that's one of the benefits.
Right.
A lot of times I bounce ideas off of like ChatGPT. I'm like, I'm thinking about this, and it helps me reframe things. And I love that. It's very helpful. But I do find increasingly like it knows how to tell me what I want. And then sometimes I'm like, you're just telling me to do the thing that you can read that I'm thinking about already doing. I'm kind of interested in like, what are the other things I should be thinking about? It feels like this objective thing. And that's one of the things that's exciting about it. It's not a human being that I have to call up and be like, all right, now I have to suss out this person's bias and the advice they give me. You ask anybody for advice on how to solve a leadership problem, you're going to get 100 different
Yes, you will.
ways of doing it. And a lot of it's, in their bias. AI is going to be just as biased because it's essentially the same way we develop bias. The data, the experience we've had as human beings informs our bias. Same thing for the AI. It's going to be the data it sees and the experience that it has.
Right. And
Yeah,
you
that's
mentioned
fascinating.
you mentioned earlier, right, the White House Communications Agency team, right, and have to understand the underlying
Yeah.
technology infrastructure. Well, at some point in time, we're gonna have to understand what the underlying data is and what the underlying, training model is and what the underlying model is to understand if there's potential bias, which then opens up
Yeah.
a whole big world of how do you verify and validate that the information that you're getting from the AI model is right. Doesn't have to be what you want, but it has to be right.
Well, then you mentioned the other big thing that I'm concerned about is critical thinking
Yes.
and how tempting it will be to let the AI do the thinking for you.
Right.
Especially if it's going to be better at getting, to an answer. Like I would hate to be in academia right now because I'm sure it's just nonstop. People submitting obviously AI written papers.
Oh, yes.
And now you have AI detection tools, but then you have AI tools that are designed to beat the AI detection tools, and it just becomes another cat and mouse sort of game. All the while the students who you're trying to prompt to learn the thing and more importantly, learn how to learn the thing, they're not.
Right.
Or they have all the, potential motivation to not learn. And
Right.
just
Yeah.
lean on this thing.
And so how do you build the right syllabus and learning examples and use cases that they have to actually think? Because I don't think the answer is a binary, you can't use AI in academia, nor do I think it's a free for all, do whatever you want.
Right.
And I think there's some bounds here. And I think this puts more pressure on the instructors and the teachers to go, okay, how do I manage this to where I'm letting them use technology? Because I'll tell you, if they don't learn how to use the technology, I mean, academia and colleges, learning environment, right? I mean, that's a learning lab.
Yeah.
So we got to make sure they're able to leverage that, but you also got to make sure that as you said, the critical thinking has to be part of that. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be on the instructors. And so I think in academia, they need to be working through, okay, how do we help our teachers to enable that versus each teacher having to figure out on their own?
Yeah, that's a tough challenge. And hopefully it's something that they're approaching purposefully. Hopefully we're educating our educators on this emerging problem and how to design a syllabus to account for
Right.
it. Maybe we'll just see more shifting away from like research papers and more like oral board type things where we're going to take any tool like that out of your pocket and make sure that, you're getting there.
Yeah. Or you can leverage the tool for your dissertation, but then you still have to have the orals. And then you won't have that tool with you on the orals. So you have to understand how it came up with that answer.
Brave new world that we're in that we
Yes.
have to
Agree.
solve. I want to ask a bit about, we've talked about your career, the leadership lessons out of your career, just starting to break open the emerging technology stuff. Let's talk about the emerging work, the emerging mission, what you're doing, what
Yes.
what sort of companies that you're working with, and what's got you interested and excited.
Yes. So I'm still very big in the national security environment, right? You can't take that out of my blood, whether I have the uniform on or not. And so, as I mentioned earlier, 5 to 6 months, 4 to 6 months, I did nothing except, travel and stuff like that. And so some of the companies I'm working with, as I thought through what I want to do, first and foremost, it was either, do I want to go full time or do I want to go part time? With the jobs that I've had in my career, I said, I'm not ready to go full time yet. Let me see what this part-time work is. So I started an LLC, and the company I'm supporting, while it's mainly within the cybersecurity information technology, I'm not going to limit myself to that. So one of the companies, and as Ali King and I talked about, right, is Forescout. Because when I look at them, I'm looking at, okay, they're still a small company, but they're focused on kind of the first piece of the cybersecurity dilemma, which is visibility and control, right? because at the end of the day, one of our biggest shortfalls is always situational understanding, right?
Yeah.
Whether battle space awareness, and I would tell you this, cybersecurity or any field, right? If you don't have an understanding, then you're never going to know if your decision is the right decision because you have a lot of unknowns. So how do you get rid of the unknowns? And Forescout, for example, is one that they're focused on, comply to connect and the ability to have visibility and then control access to the network, right? Which is very powerful because it's kind of like the first front door.
Yeah.
And then some of the other companies I'm working for are really kind of focused on the next steps, right? How are you looking at east-west traffic on a network and making sure that is valid and authenticated, identity, right? As we've seen, and I still say identity is one of the biggest challenges we still have today, because how do we know that when Andy goes and logs in to your financial institution, that it's actually you?
Right.
Right. Sometimes we have two-factor authentication. Sometimes there's multi-factor authentication. But at the end of the day, the systems, once you authenticate in, then you're golden and you're good.
Right. You are that person and you're authorized to do what you're authorized to do.
Yes. And making sure that there's a continual validation of that is important. And I think that, and that's where the companies that I'm working with is trying to get after that piece of, the continual validation that you are who you are and you're able to have access to what you're able to have access to. Because at the end of the day, walking through the defenses, the easiest way to walk through defenses is I'm an authorized user.
Yeah.
And I can do that. And how do we get to true multi-factor authentication to where, the device that you're on, how that is, where the device is located, where you are located. I know everybody cringes when we say biometrics, but there's an aspect of biometrics. I mean, you do it with your phone,
Yeah.
right? With your thumb.
Yep.
And so there's, to me, the authentication piece and identity is really important. And then the one area that I'm really excited on is kind of the whole venture capital, private equity realm. In the government, I never worried about P&L. I never worried about VC and PE. I mean, I'd heard those terms, but I never really understood them. But being able to invest in companies and help companies bring new technology to bear against operational problems is exciting.
Yeah.
And that's something I still want to do. And then all the companies that I work with, I've got to like them, right? There's a culture aspect of this and I've always been a big fan of focusing on culture of an organization, because that's what's going to drive the success or tube the success of an organization. The culture is the first way to do that.
Yeah, I think you have to have the culmination of vision, the problem being real,
Yes.
vision aligning to solving the actual problem. Like I said, I'm sure there's lots of slide decks that end up in your inbox where you're looking at it. What exactly are we doing?
Right.
This AI something or other?
Well, it's people, right? Because at the end of the day, your team has to be a cohesive team. So there's this old saying, right, that if your entire organization is A+ superstars, you're probably not going to be very successful or as successful, because there's going to be some fighting going on at some point in time. And so how do you develop that team that's, you've got some B players, some A players, some C players, whatever words you want to use, but differing levels of capability, but do they work well together, right? Do they, does one individual take care of another individual's shortfalls, right? So to where that's, the two as a sum is greater than the individual parts. That's really kind of from a senior leader standpoint that you really want to focus on, is because if the cohesion is there, the team is there, then you'll be able to take technology to the next level.
Well, Bob, we have a tradition on the Watchers podcast. We talk about challenging topics. We talk about nation state actors. We talk about China and things that can be big problems and can kind of lean into pessimism, right? If you look at it, you're like, man, we've got our work cut out for us. I'm an optimist at heart. I always come back to optimism. And I think most people who end up sitting across from me are optimists as well, because I think that's part of what puts them in the positions that they're in. I'm always curious what drives people's optimism. Where do you find your optimism? Where does it come from?
Yeah, a great question. I'll tell you, my optimism comes from the next generation. A lot of people say, our generation was the best, right? And we're always going to be the best. I would say the next generation is always better than the previous generation. And a perfect example of this is when I'm out at the academy and I'm talking to the cadets. I will tell you, if I came into the military today with the level of talent that there is and the level of curiosity and the level of ability, I would be, the lower 10%. Just because, it's just so amazing. And so to me, it's, looking at these individuals and going, there is a bright future, anything that I can do to help them, we're all in. So my optimism comes from them. It comes from the family too, right? Because at the end of the day, right? That's, I want to be there for my family, but my optimism. But my wife has told me, she tells everybody, she goes, there's not a happier person and a more optimistic person than me that she's ever seen. When I get up in the morning and I get up early, I'm right away. I'm boom, boom, boom. Let's go. Let's do something. In fact, sometimes my kids will say, we're on a vacation. They'll say, Dad, can we please just do nothing today and just relax? And we do. But I'm always on the go and always wanted, because I'm excited, because life is short. And so, making memories is what it's all about. And when I look at these individuals who are coming up and next generation, I know there's so many memories that are going to be made, and we'll be in good hands.
It's a beautiful note to end on. Bob, I really appreciate it. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've learned a lot. When we stop filming, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions before I let you leave. But we appreciate you very much. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my honor to be here. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Watchers. For more great content, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our channel. We'll see you on the next one.